And I call the honourable member for Hughes.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I will concur with the member for Melbourne on that point, that if we can agree on some of these issues, that shows there is true hope in this parliament for bipartisan support. Deputy Speaker, there's a few comments I'd like to make on the report. Firstly, just on the introduction. I'll quickly read it out. It says, like many countries around the world, the electricity system in Australia is undergoing a period of significant transition driven by a changing mix of electricity generation and the emergence of a range of new technologies and government policies for emission reduction. I think the very important point to make, Deputy Speaker, is that this so-called transition is not driven by market principles. It is not driven by ensuring we get the lowest cost electricity. It is being driven by government policies that we mandate, compulsorily mandate, unreliable and intermittent electricity into the grid. And we see that actually what does to our electricity system. We have to understand that all electrons aren't equal. And when you force intermittent and unreliable electricity generation into the grid, and you force it in through government mandates, it's like infecting the grid with a computer virus. It completely skews the normal workings of the market. It undermines the economic case of the existing generators. And that is what we have seen, Deputy Speaker. We have seen that happen here, and we have seen that result in possibly, I think, the fastest increasing electricity prices anywhere in the world. I haven't seen, Deputy Speaker, other nations have had big increases in electricity prices. But I think nowhere else in the world has experienced electricity prices to the same degree as Australia. The other point, Deputy Speaker, we're very fortunate that the committee was able to make a trip to Germany to discuss with many German experts from their energy generation sector, their distribution and their politicians about the German energy policy. Now, it was back then, Deputy Speaker, that German energy policy called, I think I pronounced my German correctly, Energiewende, seemed to be a bipartisan policy. Everyone in Germany seemed to be on board that policy. But now they are starting to see the results of this policy, putting tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of German households, pushing them into energy poverty. And only recent, Deputy Speaker, there's been a pushback. Some of the German politicians, Deputy Speaker, are starting to speak out about this. Only recently, as a week ago, Deputy Speaker, Sandra Vesser from Germany's Free Democrat Party, and she in a speech, she talked about the growing green energy capacity being installed, but that the effort to reduce CO2 had failed, and what was left was an unpredictable power grid that often produces energy when it is not needed, thus costing Germans unnecessarily hundreds of millions of dollars annually. And she went on, she said, the expansion of green energies is totally out of proportion with the existing power infrastructure, and even the most perfect grid will not be able to handle the volatile wind and solar energies. Now, there's one big difference between ourselves and Germany. In Germany, Deputy Speaker, they have interconnectors to almost all of their surrounding countries. So when the wind is not blowing in Germany, they can tap into the nuclear power plants over in France. They can tap into the coal-fired generators over in Poland. They can tap into the hydro generators in Norway and Sweden. We can't do that. We as a nation are an island. We're an electricity island. We cannot tap into other countries' electricity supplies. So the difficulty that we have is far, far more greater than the difficulties that the Germans have. Another recent speech was by another German politician, Dr. Rainer Kraft, a former doctor of chemistry. And he said Germany's policy, he described it, the policy of a fool. Their German Energiewende, he described as a policy of a fool. He called it eco-populist voodoo, designed to bring about an eco-socialist, centrally planned economy. The tide appears to have turned in Germany, Deputy Speaker. We are coming up against what is feel-good policies, against the hard engineering realities of the real world. And that is why, Deputy Speaker, we must be so careful about what we do here in this nation upon electricity policy. We've conducted an experiment, and there is nothing wrong, Deputy Speaker, at times with conducting experiments, because small-scale experiments are how we advanced as a civilisation. It's how businesses advance, where they try something new, they innovate and try something new, and they test the water, they test the market to see if it works or not. And that's what we've seen in South Australia. I often criticise them, Deputy Speaker, but they went out there and they tested the water with a 50% renewable energy target. They described it themselves as a big experiment. Now, the results of that experiment are in. It has been nothing other than an unmitigated failure, a complete disaster that has seen that state not only have the highest electricity prices in the nation, but the highest electricity prices in the entire world. And on top of that, they've had to take $500 million from a state with a population of only 1.7 million people. They've had to take $500 million that could have been invested in schools and hospitals and aged care and kids with disabilities and drug rehabilitation and all the things that we like to see spent. They have to take $500 million and put that into having diesel generators, and it's the big stunt of the big battery, which was nothing other than a complete stunt. We've seen that by the results over the past month. $500 million spent just to try and keep the lights on. And we've seen, Deputy Speaker, the comparisons with the cost of electricity in Australia and the USA. One of the things that we have to be very careful about in this nation is that we remain internationally competitive in everything that we do. And one of the most important things that we need to be internationally competitive with is the cost of energy compared to other nations, especially the USA, which is still the largest economy in the world. Now, Deputy Speaker, we've seen that the cost of electricity in many states in the USA is ranging between 10 and 12 US cents a kilowatt hour. That is something the equivalent of 13, 14, 15 cents Australian. So our electricity prices are not double that of the USA. They are in fact in many cases triple that of the USA. Deputy Speaker, we cannot continue to grow the wealth of this country if the cost of energy in Australia is double and triple what it is in the USA, when only a decade ago the costs of energy were almost parity with the United States of America. And if we look forward to what the projections are for the cost of energy in the USA, they project the cost of energy or electricity in that nation out to the year 2050, to the middle of this century, to still be around current prices. Now, we have to really think as a nation, what are we going to do? I say we should need to set targets to ensure that our electricity supply is a comparable price of what it is in the USA. Otherwise, how can industry compete? How can we create the wealth that we have in the past with our aluminium industry, our glass industry? How can our food processing, how can those industries compete, those high energy intensive industries, if the cost of energy in this nation is so much higher than elsewhere than it is in the rest of the world? The other comment, Deputy Speaker, we also need to look at the cost of the transmission lines. An example, we have our electricity generators free riding. We see the case with Liddell, AGL closing it down. There is already at least $1 billion in sunk costs in those transmission lines. If AGL closed Liddell down, that cost is written off and is a cost to the national economy.
Expired.